My stepbrother stole my puppy to rehome him, but I exposed the online ad and proved every record had my name on it. It's funny, the things you think you can count on in this life and the things that sneak up and surprise you. For the last 5 years, since my husband, bless his soul, passed on, my world had gotten very quiet. It was just me and the 4 walls of our little house, the one we'd bought when the kids were still toddlers, full of ghosts and memories that had started to feel more like dust than comfort. The silence was the hardest part, you know? It was a heavy, thick blanket I couldn't seem to shake off. That's why last spring, I decided to do something about it. My knitting circle friends had been gently suggesting it for months, saying I needed a little life in the house again. I'd resisted, feeling like it was somehow a betrayal to my late George. But one Tuesday, after staring at an empty armchair for an hour, I drove myself down to the county shelter. I went just to look, or so I told myself. But then I saw him, a little terrier mix with ears too big for his head and soulful brown eyes that seemed to understand the shape of the hole in my life. He was a scruffy thing, all wire and wags, and I knew in an instant. I named him Pip. Suddenly, my house wasn't quiet anymore. The first thing I heard in the morning wasn't the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, but the happy jingle of Pip's collar as he stretched in his bed beside mine. There was the click-clack of his nails on the linoleum as he followed me into the kitchen, his little body weaving between my ankles as I filled the kettle. He was my shadow, my companion, my furry little reason to get up and face the day. The whistle of the kettle, the warmth of a mug in my hands, and Pip's warm weight on my feet became my new rhythm, and it was a good one. Our days fell into a comfortable routine. We'd take a walk around the block after breakfast, me in my sensible shoes and Pip trotting ahead as if he were leading a grand expedition. In the afternoons, he'd nap by my armchair while I worked on my knitting, the soft rise and fall of his breathing a more comforting sound than any music. When the landline would ring, he'd lift his head and give a little woof, as if to announce the call. Evenings were for my mystery shows, and he'd be right there, snoring softly on the rug, a steadfast presence in the flickering light of the television. He filled the empty spaces I hadn't even realized were still aching. My stepbrother, John, is my late husband's son from his first marriage. He's a man in his 40s, but he carries himself with the perpetual sigh of someone who feels life has dealt him a bad hand. He always seems to be in some kind of financial bind, some scheme that's gone south. He'd stop by every few weeks, usually on a Tuesday when he knew my pension check had come, to borrow $20 or just to sit at my kitchen table and complain. I always tried to be kind, for George's sake. When I first brought Pip home, John was dismissive, almost disdainful. He'd watch the puppy tumble around the living room and shake his head. "A dog is a lot of work, you know," he'd say, a line that always felt like a criticism than a statement of fact. "It's too much responsibility for a woman of your age, living alone." I would just smile and tell him Pip was keeping me young, that having a reason to get out and walk was the best thing for my old bones. But he never seemed to hear me. He just saw a problem where I saw a blessing. Over the next few months, his comments started to take on a different tone. He stopped talking about my ability to care for Pip and started talking about Pip's quality of life. He'd watch my little dog dozing in a patch of sun and say things like, "It's not fair to the animal, really. A dog like that needs a big yard, a family, with kids to run around with. All this quiet, it's not natural for them." He made it sound as if my peaceful home was a prison for this happy little creature who was currently my entire world.
I tried to explain that Pip was perfectly content. He had his walks in the park where he met other dogs, and my friends from the church auxiliary doted on him, slipping him little bits of biscuit when they thought I wasn't looking. He had a warm bed, a full belly, and more love than any dog could ask for. But John had this idea stuck in his head, this narrative that I was being selfish. He was planting a seed, and I was beginning to feel a deep, unsettling chill whenever he brought it up. One afternoon, he came over for coffee, and he was more insistent than usual. He sat across from me, stirring 3 heaping spoonfuls of sugar into his cup, his eyes avoiding mine. "You know," he said, his voice taking on that oily, reasonable tone he used when he was about to ask for a big favor, "I've been thinking a lot about little Buddy." He never bothered to learn Pip's name. "It's time to start thinking about his best interests. It's about being a responsible pet owner."
I placed my cup down carefully, my hand steady, despite the tremor I felt inside. "John, Pip is perfectly happy here. He is my dog. This is his home." He waved his hand dismissively, as if swatting away my feelings like a fly. He said I wasn't seeing the big picture, that I was letting my emotions cloud my judgment. And that's when he said the word that would echo in my mind for weeks. He said it was just rehoming. He called it thinking of the dog's best interest, a noble, selfless act. But the look in his eye felt all wrong. It wasn't about the dog. It felt like he was trying to teach me a lesson, to put me in my place, to remind me that I was an old woman who shouldn't have things that brought her joy. I told him, politely, but with a spine of steel I learned to cultivate over 67 years, that Pip was home for good, and the discussion was over. He left in a huff, the screen door slamming behind him, and the silence he left in his wake felt heavy and threatening. For 2 weeks, I didn't hear from him, and I confess, it was a relief. I pushed his strange words to the back of my mind and focused on my little companion. We went about our days, the walks, the knitting, the evening shows, but a small seed of anxiety had been planted. I found myself double-checking the latch on the back gate and making sure the front door was locked even when I was just stepping out to get the mail. It was a faint background hum of worry that I couldn't quite shake. Then, on a Thursday, it happened. I had my weekly grocery run, which usually takes me about an hour and a half. I left Pip with a fresh bowl of water and his favorite squeaky hedgehog toy, just as I always did. But when I came home and turned the key in the lock, the house was silent. Not the peaceful, contented silence of a napping puppy, but a hollow, empty silence that hit me like a physical blow. The leash was still on its hook. The hedgehog toy was lying abandoned in the middle of the living room floor. He never, ever left it there. I called his name, my voice sounding thin and reedy in the stillness. "Pip, Pip, boy, where are you?" I walked through every room, my heart starting to pound a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I checked under the beds, behind the curtains, even in the closets. The back door was shut tight. I ran out to the yard, my grocery bags forgotten on the kitchen counter. The gate was closed and latched. A cold, sickening dread started to creep up my spine. He was gone. My next-door neighbor, Martha, a lovely woman who keeps an eye out for me, saw me walking in frantic circles in my yard. She came bustling over, her face a mask of concern. "Everything all right, dear?" she asked. Through my panicked tears, I explained that Pip was missing. Her brow furrowed. "That's funny," she said, tapping her chin. "I saw John's truck in your driveway about an hour ago. I figured he was visiting." The dread solidified into a block of ice in my stomach. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely dial his number on the old landline. The phone rang 5 times before he picked up, his voice sounding oddly breathless. When I asked him if he had seen Pip, his story was a jumbled, transparent mess. At first, he flatly denied being anywhere near my house. "No, I've been running errands on the other side of town all day," he insisted. But when I told him Martha had seen his truck, his story shifted. "Oh, right, I did stop by for a minute to drop off that book I borrowed. Pip must have darted out the door when I left. He's a quick little thing." I knew he was lying. Pip was my shadow. He wouldn't have run out an open door without me. He would have been right at John's feet, waiting for me to come home. That's when the grief, the raw, tearing grief of losing my little friend, began to curdle into a quiet, steady anger. I've learned in my 67 years that panic doesn't solve a thing. You have to breathe, you have to think, and you have to act. My granddaughter, bless her tech-savvy heart, had once sat down with me and patiently shown me how to use the local online marketplace website to sell some of George's old woodworking tools. She'd said, "Grandma, you can find anything on here, from couches to cars." On a terrible, gut-wrenching hunch, I sat down at my little desk, opened my laptop, and typed the words "Terrier Mix Puppy" into the search bar. My heart sank with every photo I scrolled past: a litter of golden retrievers, a fluffy poodle, a sad-eyed beagle. None of them were my Pip. For a moment, I allowed myself a sliver of hope that I was wrong, that he had just somehow gotten out and a kind stranger would find him. I scrolled for what felt like an eternity, my eyes blurring from the screen. And then I saw him. There was no mistaking those oversized ears and that hopeful tilt of his head. It was Pip, sitting on the stained passenger seat of John's beat-up Ford truck, looking lost and confused. I found the listing with my puppy's photo and a price tag, $300. The title of the ad read, "Loving Family Dog Needs New Home Urgent." I clicked on it, my blood running cold as I read the description. The seller, who was using a fake name but whose profile picture was conveniently blank, claimed he was a family man whose young child had developed a sudden, severe allergy. He wrote that the dog, whom he called Buddy, was a wonderful companion and that it was breaking their hearts to let him go. Every single word was a calculated, cruel lie. The betrayal was so profound, it felt like a physical wound. That's when the woman who cried in her backyard disappeared, and another woman took her place. This was the woman who had managed a household budget for 40 years, who had navigated hospital paperwork and insurance claims, who knew that when things get messy, you get organized. I took a picture of the computer screen with my phone, a screenshot as my granddaughter had taught me, making sure to capture the listing number, the seller's fake name, and the entire fraudulent description. I saved it, my movements precise and deliberate. Then I walked over to the old metal file cabinet in the study, the one where I keep everything important, from birth certificates to the deed to the house. I pulled open the bottom drawer and retrieved a folder with a single, neat label, Pip. Inside was every piece of paper that tied him to me. I laid them out on the dining room table, creating an arsenal of facts. First was the adoption contract from the county shelter, dated and signed, with my name and address clearly printed in the owner section. It was a legal document, a transfer of responsibility and care from them to me. Next, I pulled out the receipt from my veterinarian. It was itemized, showing the cost of his first checkup, his vaccinations, and, most importantly, the fee for his microchip implant. A microchip, the vet had explained, was a tiny electronic capsule, no bigger than a grain of rice, inserted just under the skin. It contained a unique number, and if a lost pet was ever found and scanned, that number would lead directly back to the registered owner. It was a permanent, unalterable link between me and my dog. And I had the proof of that link. I had the confirmation email I'd printed out from the microchip registry service. After the vet visit, I had gone online, created an account, and entered Pip's chip number. I had registered him to my name, my home address, my landline number, and my cell phone number. I was his primary contact, his emergency contact, his everything. No one could change that information without my password and the two-factor authentication code that would be sent to my phone. It was a digital fortress protecting my boy. Finally, I had his county license. It was a simple piece of paper, a receipt, really, but it came with a little metal tag for his collar. That tag had a license number on it, and that number was recorded in the county's official database, right next to my name. It was proof that in the eyes of the law, he wasn't just my pet, he was my legal property. Each document was a brick in a wall that John could not break. He had the dog, but I had the proof. The online marketplace website had a small link at the bottom of the listing. Report this item. I clicked it without hesitation. A box appeared asking for the reason for the report. I selected fraudulent or misleading listing. In the text box, I wrote as plainly and calmly as I could. The person who listed this dog for sale is not the legal owner. This dog, whose name is Pip, was taken from my home without my permission. The seller is my stepson, and the story in the ad is a complete fabrication. I am the legal owner, and I have the documentation to prove it. I saw a button that said Attach Files. I took clear photos of my adoption contract, the microchip registration, and the county license, and I attached them to the report. I submitted it, feeling a small, grim sense of satisfaction. I had no idea if anyone would even read it, but I had to try. I had to fight for him with every tool I had. To my surprise, less than an hour later, an email landed in my inbox. It was from the platform's support team. The moderator removed his ad after my report. The message was brief and professional. It said they took reports of pet scams very seriously, and based on the evidence I had provided, they had taken down the listing and suspended the seller's account pending further investigation. It was one small victory, but it felt monumental. The digital trail of his crime was gone. Now came the hardest part, getting Pip back safely. John's account was suspended, but he still had the dog, and he still had the burner phone number he'd listed in the ad. I couldn't just call him myself. He'd know it was me and would likely panic, and who knows what he would do then? I needed a plan. I thought of Martha's son, a kind young man named David who was home from college for the summer. He was good with all that tech stuff and had a level head on his shoulders. I called Martha and explained the situation, and within minutes, David was at my door, his face set with determination. I showed him the screenshot of the ad and the phone number. "I need you to pretend to be an interested buyer," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Tell him you saw the ad before it was taken down, and you're very interested in Buddy. You have the cash and can meet him as soon as possible." David agreed immediately. He used his own cell phone to send the text message, keeping it simple and direct. "Hi, saw your ad for the terrier mix. Is he still available? Can meet today." John, using his fake name, replied almost instantly. He was clearly eager to make the sale before his scheme fell apart completely. He said the dog was still available and that he had a lot of interest, so the first person with cash would get him. David texted back, saying he could meet in an hour. The crucial part was the location. I couldn't have them meet at a park or some anonymous parking lot. It had to be somewhere safe, somewhere with people, somewhere I could have an advantage. "Tell him to meet you at the parking lot of the Oakwood Veterinary Clinic," I instructed David. "Say your sister is a vet tech there, and she wants to give the dog a quick look over before you pay." It was a plausible excuse, and John bought it. He agreed to meet there at 3 o'clock. As soon as the meeting was set, I made 2 more phone calls. The first was to the vet clinic itself. I spoke to the office manager, explained the entire sordid story, and asked if they would be willing to help. They were wonderful, immediately offering to have a technician ready to perform a microchip scan the moment the dog was on their property. The second call was to the non-emergency police line. I didn't want a big scene with sirens and drama. I just wanted a quiet, official presence. I explained that it was a property dispute, that I had proof of ownership, and that I was arranging to recover my stolen pet. The dispatcher was incredibly understanding and promised to have a patrol car in the area at the appointed time, along with an officer from animal control. The next hour was the longest of my life. I sat in my car in the parking lot of the grocery store across the street from the vet clinic, my folder of papers on the passenger seat beside me. David was already there, leaning against the clinic's brick wall, scrolling on his phone like any other young person waiting for a friend. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear and hope. What if John didn't show up? What if he suspected something? What if I never saw my little Pip again? Then, at 3:05, John's rusty Ford truck pulled into the lot. My breath caught in my throat. In the passenger seat, I could see a small, furry head, a pair of oversized ears perked up, looking around nervously. It was him. It was my Pip. As John got out of the truck, pulling Pip along on a cheap nylon rope, a woman in an animal control uniform emerged from the clinic's side door. She walked toward John with a calm, friendly demeanor, as if she were just another dog lover. The police car pulled quietly into the far end of the lot, its presence a silent promise of authority. The animal control officers smiled at John. "What a handsome little guy," she said, crouching down to look at Pip. "I'm Officer Miller. We got a call about a stray in the area, just doing our routine check. Would you mind if I just did a quick scan? It only takes a second." Before John could even process what was happening, she had a small handheld device out and was passing it over Pip's shoulder blades. The device beeped. The microchip scan pulled up my name and number.
My cell phone, clutched in my sweating palm, buzzed with an alert from the microchip company that read, "Your pet, Pip, has been scanned near Oakwood Veterinary Clinic." That was it. That was the unshakable electronic proof. I got out of my car and walked across the street, holding my folder like a shield. John's face, which had been a mask of feigned friendliness for the officer, crumpled when he saw me. His bravado evaporated, replaced by a pasty, panicked look. He started sputtering, his words tumbling over each other in a desperate attempt to create a new reality. "It's a misunderstanding. I was just helping her out. She can't handle a dog. I was finding him a better home," he blurted out, gesturing wildly between me and the officer. He claimed he was in debt and needed the money for his daughter's braces. In the next breath, he claimed his daughter really did have a sudden, terrible allergy. He even tried to say he was doing me a favor, that he was worried about me, and this was his clumsy way of helping. It was a pathetic cascade of lies, each one more desperate than the last. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't even raise my voice. I simply opened my folder and handed the original signed adoption contract to Officer Miller. "He can say whatever he wants," I said, my voice quiet but clear. "But this piece of paper says the dog is mine." The adoption contract had only my signature. Officer Miller looked at the contract, then at the information that had popped up on her scanner, then at John's pale, sweating face. She didn't need to be a detective to see the truth. She handed the nylon rope to me, and I knelt, fumbling with the clasp to attach Pip's proper leash, which I'd brought with me. Pip, seeming to understand that he was finally safe, leaped into my arms, licking away the tears that were now streaming down my face. The officer thanked David for his help and then turned her attention back to John. She spoke to him in a low, professional tone, explaining that taking property that didn't belong to him wasn't rehoming, it was theft. She wrote him a citation and informed me that I could file a formal report at the station, which I fully intended to do. We didn't have to go to a big, intimidating courtroom with lawyers and a jury. This wasn't that kind of case. The matter was handled at the county clerk's office a few weeks later, in a small, quiet room that felt more like a DMV than a court of law. It was what they called a magistrate hearing, which is just a simple way for a neutral party to look at the facts and make a decision without a lot of fuss. It was just me, John, and a clerk, a no-nonsense woman with sharp eyes and a sharper haircut. John started in on his long, rambling story again, trying to paint himself as a concerned son and me as a confused old woman. He talked about my loneliness and his financial troubles, weaving a tale of noble intentions gone wrong. The clerk let him talk for about 2 minutes before she held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. She then turned to me. I didn't give a speech. I just pushed my folder across the table. Inside was the police report, a copy of the citation John had received, the adoption contract, the microchip registration, and the county license. I had made a neat, chronological stack of the truth. The clerk spent a few minutes looking over every single page, her expression unreadable. When she was done, she looked over her glasses at John. She tapped the top page, which was the report from Animal Control. The clerk called it theft, not a family dispute. Her voice was flat and final. She said that his motives, whatever he claimed they were, didn't matter. The facts were simple. The dog was legally registered to me, and he had taken it with the intent to sell it. It was that clear. Because I had the paper trail, his stories were nothing but air. The outcome was tidy and realistic. The magistrate who reviewed the clerk's findings didn't send him to jail, which was a relief to me in a way. This was about justice for Pip, not vengeance against John. But there were consequences. The judge ordered him to return the dog and pay costs. Of course, Pip was already home with me, but the order made it official. The costs included repaying my original adoption fee to the shelter as a donation, covering the bill for a full checkup I'd gotten for Pip just to be safe, and a $200 fine. He was also assigned 50 hours of community service to be served at the very animal shelter where I had found my best friend.
The judge also suggested he write me a formal letter of apology. It arrived in my mailbox a week later, a single page of stilted, self-pitying prose that was more about his own troubles than his remorse. But he did, in one short sentence, say he was sorry for taking the dog. I don't know if our relationship will ever recover. Family is a complicated thing. You can't just cut a piece of it out without leaving a scar. But you can, and you must, learn to build a taller, stronger fence. I forgave, but I did not forget. Now my life is back to its comfortable rhythm. The kettle whistles on the stove every morning, a cheerful sound that promises a new day. Pip's little snores fill the quiet while I watch my evening shows, a constant comforting reassurance that he is here, he is safe. His leash is back on its hook by the door, always ready for our next adventure, even if it's just a walk around the block. The house is no longer silent. It's filled with the small, happy sounds of a life shared. The whole ordeal taught me something I think is important for anyone, especially for those of us who live alone. If a pet is yours, truly yours, make sure the world knows it in black and white. Register that microchip the very same day you bring them home, and make sure all the contact information is yours and yours alone. Keep the adoption or purchase papers in a safe place, and maybe even make a digital copy with your phone and email it to yourself or a trusted family member. Never, ever hand over your original documents to anyone, no matter how close they are. A piece of paper might seem like a small, flimsy thing, but it can be a shield. It can speak the truth for you when your own voice is shaking too much to be heard. He called it rehoming. The records called it mine.